So Hillel, you are named by the Maariv newspaper in Israel as one of the most the 100 most influential Jews in the world, and you are named that when you are in before your 40s, right? How get you feel to be one of the most influential Jews in the world, and have this role of protecting the truth and human rights, and in the end of the day, also Israel image in one of the most hostile places in the world, which is the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva?
Yes, well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here once again, and thank you for having me. And I hear from so many people about the terrific work that you're doing. I see some of it, but I don't speak Portuguese, and I don't live in Brazil. But I hear terrific things about the work that you're doing. So congratulations, and it's great that you have an important following. I'm happy to meet virtually your audience. So I don't think about the nice title that I was given some years ago by a newspaper. I don't think about it too much. I'm in Geneva and at the United Nations, and just trying to speak up for what's decent, for what's fair, for what's honest. And we see things that are just the opposite of what's normal, you know, and black is white, up is down. It really looks like the worst dystopian nightmares of George Orwell, described, for example, in his novel 1984, have come alive at the United Nations Human Rights Council. So you may have seen that the other day, a day or two ago, the member of the Commission of Inquiry of the Human Rights Council, which was created a year ago, but is really only getting started in recent months. There's a Commission of Inquiry that was created at the UN Human Rights Council targeting Israel. And one of the members just gave an interview and he talked about how the Jewish lobby controls social media and that Israel shouldn't even be at the United Nations. And he's obliged under the rules of the UN to be impartial, objective. So he's being condemned as we speak by the British government, by the US Special Envoy on Anti-Semitism, the US Ambassador. I think the Canadian Ambassador to the United Nations just condemned him. And it doesn't surprise me, to be honest, because as I just wrote on Twitter a few moments ago, when it comes to these members of these commissions targeting Israel, this kind of hatred is not a bug, as they say in the computer worlds, it's a feature. It's that's how they're designed. So to answer your question, I just see myself as sitting there representing sanity and speaking out, and certainly as a result, I'm very much hated at the United Nations in Geneva.
Yeah, I have a lot of questions about the backstage of these meetings, but before that, I would like to give you the opportunity to tell us how everything started. How was the creation of UN Watch, and how you got enrolled and involved with that? And I wanted to remember we drink coffee once in IDC in the Herzliya conference, that 8 years ago in 2014, when I was an MA student at IDC. Yeah.
Okay, very nice. And tell me, how do I pronounce your last name?
Leist.
Okay.
Leist.
Good.
It's like a Polish one. It's like a, yeah.
Yeah,
in Brazil, it's a joke because I go to interviews and every interviewer asks me, André Leist, lost, least, last. It's like a bunch of pronunciations, but
okay.
It's okay.
That's fine. My name is pronounced Neuer, but in Canada, some people thought it was Neuer, so that's no worries.
And here in Brazil, people know you as Neuer.
No worries. But it's so you can correct them. It's Neuer.
Neuer.
Yeah. So you asked me, I think, how UN Watch was created. So UN Watch, I did not create UN Watch. It was created nearly 30 years ago by a great U.S. human rights leader named Morris Abram. He was a lawyer, Jewish, had come from the south of America in the state of Georgia. And of course, there was at that time in America segregation, where Black people were discriminated against and sometimes weren't really allowed to vote, or their votes weren't counted properly. And he in the 1950s, before it was popular, became very close with Martin Luther King and was very active as a leading attorney struggling for the equal rights, for the civil rights of Black people, African Americans in the United States. So that was Morris Abram, and he went on to serve 5 presidents in different capacities, sometimes serving on civil rights commissions, and was a delegate to the UN Human Rights Commission in the 1960s. And eventually, he was made United States ambassador to the United Nations in Geneva. Of course, there's the United Nations headquarters in New York, which is the most famous, where they have the Security Council, the General Assembly. Yeah. But Geneva is the #2 campus of the UN. And there they have numerous specialized agencies, such as the UN Refugee Agency, the World Health Organization, telecommunications, and many other things. And one of them, of course, is the Human Rights Council. And so Morris Abram was the ambassador in Geneva, and he was there from 1989 to 1993. And then he retired, and he had the idea to create an independent organization that would watch the UN, that would seek to uphold the United Nations Charter, which is a noble document. It's a great document of liberal internationalism. Sadly, it's been hijacked. And so he created UN Watch to speak out on universal issues affecting the United Nations, to see that the UN would live up to its charter, with a specific interest and focus on fighting the unequal treatment, the discriminatory treatment against Israel at the United Nations, and anti-Semitism. And sadly, we continue to need to be active on all of those fronts. So UN Watch today, and here I will conclude, we are extremely active in bringing human rights victims to testify at the United Nations from some of the worst dictatorships, from Russia, China, Cuba, Venezuela, Pakistan, and many other countries. And we work with some of the most prominent dissidents, people who were political prisoners in these countries. And then we're the leading group fighting anti-Semitism and the unequal treatment of Israel, which is very extreme at the Human Rights Council.
Yeah, and your when you joined it, and you said that you didn't create it, but you joined it a lot of years. I
Yes.
know you since ever.
Yes.
I mean,
yes,
since
yes,
I started work.
Yes, yes. Most people think that maybe that I created it. No, it was created in 1993. Morris Abram died in the year 2000, and I came to Geneva 4 years later in the year 2004. So I've been for 18 years with UN Watch.
You know, your videos, it's like a very unique position, because when we see the meetings during the ordinary or extraordinary meetings inside of the chamber, we see that the country speaks, and then the president gives the floor for UN Watch, and we don't have others NGOs doing the same thing. It's the only NGO doing this, right? Speaking up about this no sense sometimes, right? You are alone there.
Well, yes and no, meaning on the whole, yes, but there are, just to clarify, there are maybe 3,000 or 4,000 organizations that have the status and the right to speak in Geneva at the United Nations. Many of them do not come. They're doing other things, but more and more people do come. And there are a number of organizations, Jewish organizations, that speak out against anti-Semitism that may come from time to time, but there's no one who's there full-time focused on the issues in the way that we are. But there are various groups that may do little bits of what we do, but no one is doing it full-time and as a primary part of their work.
So your videos here in Brazil, just to people to understand, your videos are translated, subtitled always. I myself translated once 8 years ago, 7 years ago, and now we have Stand With Us Brazil. We have a full chapter here, and we have a staff that do this work of translating and putting subtitles in these videos. And we remember when Hassam Youssef was in the United Nations. You remember when you speak up about the Jews, the apartheid, and what is the Jews in all the other countries. There are many famous videos that many people in Brazil not related to the Jewish community. I'm talking about politicians, journalists, bloggers, people that are in the media, in the academia, saw those videos, and suddenly they realized there is a problem. And how is the feeling? I mean, we see you in the screen speaking up for 5 minutes, and then the video ends. What happened next in the chamber? Did you ever talk to the people that you are talking to during the video? The ambassador of Algeria, the ambassador of Cuba. You are always being interrupted by the ambassador of somebody, right? If you mention, there is like a rule, if you can also mention that, if you mention the country, they can stop you, right?
Yes, well, it's not actually the rule. You ask good questions, and I'll try to answer some of them. The normal way for things to go would be that for a given debate, you have countries get to speak first. Those who are elected members of the Human Rights Council. There are only 47 countries at any one time who get to be on the Human Rights Council. The other countries are present. So for example, my country is Canada, where I grew up, and that's my only citizenship. And Canada has not been a member for a number of years, but they are in the room, they are present, they participate. The only thing they cannot do is vote at the end of the session when there's a vote, but they can speak. So first they invite the members to speak, the 47 members, whoever wants to take the floor. And usually these days the time gets reduced. A member state might get 2.5 minutes to speak, sometimes 2 minutes. And then the countries that are not members are called observers, get to speak. So like Canada. And they would maybe get 90 seconds, which is very short. So it's just 1.5 minutes, sometimes 2 minutes. And then they invite the NGOs, and there it's a bit complicated. Sometimes it's any NGO that's there and that signs up, which might be 50 NGOs for a debate. And in some debates, they don't have enough time, so they only give you 10 NGOs to speak. And then we're one of the 10, if we're lucky. Sometimes we sign up, and for some reason, our name is not on the list, and that's an interesting question.
Some reason, right?
Some interesting reason, Andre. Yeah, in the last session, we requested to speak 36 times under what's called interactive dialogue, to communicate, to ask questions to a UN expert, a special rapporteur, and we got 0. We would normally get 20 speeches. This time we got 0, and there's no possible rational explanation, because there's a computer and it selects by priorities and time, and we were the first to sign up, and it suggests that something is very strange in Geneva of the people who are running the Secretariat of the Human Rights Council. But you asked me what happens afterwards. So the answer is, it depends. Generally nothing, meaning there's speeches the whole day. So from 10 a.m. until 6 p.m., it's nonstop speeches. And the chairman is saying, okay, now Cuba, Venezuela, this and that. And then he says, and now UN Watch, and we speak. And normally they just move to the next NGO. Now with us, things are a little different. We're never treated quite the same. You asked about interrupting, that I often get interrupted, which is true. And you said it seems like they have a right to interrupt. Not really, and I'll explain about that. The rule is that if a country wants to reply, if you said something that they don't agree with, they have what's called a right of reply. That does not entitle them to interrupt anyone, but rather to wait. And an hour later, 2 hours later, sometimes at the end of the day, the chairman will say, now that we're finished, is there any country that would like to exercise the right of reply? That's when a country should raise their hand and say, Mr. Chairman, we heard UN Watch and they criticized the Cuban government and we don't agree and all that. That's the normal way what they should. For various reasons, they abuse the procedures. So there is a rule and procedure called a point of order. That's what you always hear them saying. Ah, yes, a point of order from Cuba, a point of order from China. And what they say is they try to, in fact, they don't like the content of what I said. And so they really should wait till the end of the debate for the right of reply. But rather, they want to interrupt me perhaps to show the dictator back home that they are aggressive, to show to intimidate us. So they raise their hand and they say, Mr. Chairman, there's a point of order. There's something in the procedure that's wrong. Well, what's wrong in the procedure? We're speaking. They say, oh, wait. First, they say, this NGO, they're not speaking about the correct agenda item. The agenda item is human rights around the world, but they're speaking about something else. And, well, it's not true. We are speaking about human rights, or whatever the agenda item is, that's what we're speaking about. And we always make sure to connect it to the topic. But they just are looking for a pretext, a fake pretend reason to be able to invoke a procedure and to say that we're violating the procedure. In truth, they just don't like the content of what we're saying. And the chairman is usually not very strong. The chair is usually very weak. And we have no particular strength. We're just an organization. And the chair does not want to anger China and Venezuela and Cuba. It could create problems for the country where he comes from. The current chairman is from Argentina. And if he doesn't do what the Cuban ambassador wants, he'll have trouble next time when the Latin American group meets. The Cubans will give him a hard time. So unfortunately, the procedures are abused. And then to come back to your question, what happens afterwards? Now, normally nothing. The people in the room are used to all kinds of things, and I speak, someone else speaks, and so forth. Sometimes with us, things are a little bit different. Sometimes after I speak, there's silence in the room, and sometimes people come up to me afterwards, but not too much happens in the room. We are trying to influence the diplomats, the governments, but it's true that the people in the room are a little bit, have their hearts kind of fixed and are not so influenced by things. And maybe sometimes we're able to influence people outside the room, people maybe in Brazil and hearts and minds.
But did you ever got like hello or good morning or a question from ambassadors from countries that you criticize in public, but in the corridor, in the toilet, maybe, the toilet conversation in the UN, Juan Prosor, that was ambassador of Israel in the UN in New York, he was in Brazil once, a couple of years ago, and he told there are many conversations sometimes with people that we don't talk in front of cameras in the back, in the corridor. And sometimes, you can imagine that you are criticizing. I remember specifically when Hassan Youssef, the son of Hamas that wrote the book, he was there. And throughout his speech, you'd have two gentlemen in the front that turned out and started to look, and they had the face that they are liking what he were hearing. I'm right? And they look Middle Eastern, and they look Middle Eastern.
That they liked it or didn't like it?
They like it.
No, they didn't like it. They didn't like it. Look again. They were in shock. They were in shock.
Who are they?
And
by the way,
I will tell you in a moment. But they were in shock, and they were not government. They are Arabs from Israel, actually, who live in the Nazareth area, and they are followers of Sheikh. I think his name is Raed Saleh. I might be getting his name wrong.
Oh, but, the Sheikh Salah, the head of the northern branch of the Islamic movement. Oh, this is a hard guy. He was in jail.
He's kind of, you might say, the cousin of Hamas, a little bit.
Yeah, something like that.
Meaning he's in Israel, but his views are probably a bit similar to Hamas. And he's considered radical, and he incites people saying the Jews are coming to take over the Temple Mount.
Yeah.
And he's been in prison. He was kicked out of the UK. They are followers of him. One of the people there is a lawyer who maybe helps to try to get him out of prison. And so I did meet one of them the next day. I was flying to Israel in El Al, and I met one of them, and I spoke to him, and I recognized him. But in the video, it's funny. One of them, on his Facebook page, I found out who he was. And anyway, on his Facebook page, a week later, because the video went viral, it was seen 10 million times. In different languages, and his face was there. So his friends in Israel, they saw it. So he many people wrote to him and said, "What's going on?" So So he talked about it on his page, but someone wrote, one of his friends commented, said that Mossab Hassan Youssef is a dog, to curse him, said he's a dog. And someone else commented and said, no, he's not a dog. A dog is loyal. He's worse than a dog.
Yeah.
So these are the people there, and their heads were turning, in my opinion, because they're his cousin, meaning they're Arab Israelis who are, ethnically related to Mossab, and also of the same movement. He's the son of the Hamas leader. They're the Hamas in Israel, kind of. I'm not saying they're terrorists, but they're similar views. And they went into shock. That's why when the guy was doing this and he kept turning his head, they basically were going into shock.
But with this piece of information now, I can conclude something else. Because if they were part of the Islamic movement of the North Branch, which is much more radical than the South Branch, which is actually Ram, the party, right?
Yeah.
And Mossab Youssef was criticizing the PA, and Hamas hate PAs. So maybe they were liking that.
But it's a good point. It's a good point. No, they didn't like it. They were just in shock. They were just in shock because they probably know who his father is. And they were just kind of in shock. They didn't know what was happening. They didn't know what was happening. They was something is happening here, and he was speaking so strongly, and they were kind of going into shock.
They were not expecting that. I wanted to ask you something about the past of the council, because I know that if you can answer to the people. There were a commission of human rights before, and then there are the Council of Human Rights, right? There was a reform that was created, I think, by the United States. Some countries pushed to reform the commission to council to commission. I don't remember now the name, but and there were less countries, and now have more countries or something. There were 54 members, and now it's 48 or the other around. And they did that because they wanted to, of course, to fight this bias against Israel. I think one of the most important things was that. And they didn't succeed, right? Until today, most of and if you can, I don't know, maybe 50% or a little bit less percent of the council are members from non-democratic countries. And you have Iran was president of the Secretary of Human Rights, and Syria wanted to be in the disarmament commission, and Saudi Arabia was once president of the commission. We have those examples here. We use that in lessons, and people get shocked. And what happened? Why? We didn't succeed. I'm talking about Western democracies. Why they didn't succeed to change that? What is needed to change, in your opinion, because you are there every day? And if you can give a couple more examples of extraordinary facts, talking about countries that violate human rights every single day, being leaders of subcommissions that actually try to protect the rights that they violate every day.
Yeah, well, thank you. You asked some excellent questions. So let's talk about this reform. Indeed, it is true that the Commission on Human Rights was created in 1946, shortly after the UN, which was created in 1945. So a year later, they created their Human Rights Commission. And in its early years, it was headed by great people. The founding chair of the Human Rights Commission was Eleanor Roosevelt. Her deputy, her vice chair, was René Cassin, the French legal philosopher. And they had other important people on their commission. And in the early years, they did good things. In 1948, 2 years later, they adopted the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, which was a very important, worthwhile document. However, over time, this commission became hijacked. It became a body not of eminent idealists and individuals, but of governments. They changed the system. So it became a body of governments. And ironically, paradoxically, absurdly, the countries that sought to join this council were not those who were traditionally supporters of human rights, but in many cases the opposite. It's true that America was always a member for many years, but gradually countries like China, Sudan, Cuba, they said, we want to be on this commission because if we're on the commission, if we vote, we can help use our leverage and defend ourselves and shield ourselves and make sure that we are never condemned, and instead we can condemn other countries like Israel. So that's what happened. And about 50 years ago, late 1960s, they began to create a special agenda item against Israel. There is one agenda item in every meeting on 193 countries, where if you want to talk about any country, you can do so under agenda item 4. And there's another agenda item today called agenda item 7, which is only against Israel. No other country in the world, not Sudan, not Syria, not Russia, not North Korea, they don't have their own agenda item. Only Israel is targeted, specially, unfairly, singled out in every meeting of the Human Rights Council. So this actually began about 50 years ago, and the Human Rights Commission was criticized, and most famously in the year 2003, Colonel Muammar Gaddafi, the dictator of Libya, a murderous dictator, he became the chair, his regime became the chair of the Human Rights Commission. And that was very embarrassing. That headline went around the world, that Libya is now the chair of the Human Rights Commission. And people began to speak about this, certainly in the United States. There were voices saying this is a joke, a bad joke. And in the year 2005, Kofi Annan, who was Secretary General of the UN, he was feeling pressure for various reasons, some allegations of corruption called oil for food. In any case, he made a proposal to change the UN, to reform the UN. And he had many proposals. One of them was to replace the Human Rights Commission and to create a new body that would have countries that actually care about human rights, to have membership standards, to have a smaller body, and it would be called the Human Rights Council. And to some degree, it worked, meaning a year later, there was a big reform. This never happened before. This doesn't happen at the United Nations, to eliminate a body that doesn't work. The General Assembly hasn't worked very well, but no one's eliminating that. But they eliminated the Human Rights Commission, and they replaced it with the new and improved Human Rights Council, a resolution adopted on March 15th, 2006, and the change happened in June. And sadly, as you said, Andre, 16 years later, if we look at the new and improved Human Rights Council, well, what changed? Look at the membership. The membership today has never been worse. The membership today is 66% non-democracies, dictatorships or other countries that are not democracies. That means members like Libya, Cuba, Venezuela, Eritrea, Somalia, Pakistan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan. Russia was a member until recently. China is a member. So in the end, if you have that kind of membership, you ask, why do you have that membership? Well, there's elections held in New York, and these dictatorships want to be on the council. Okay, and indeed, it changed the membership. You asked why it didn't work. The membership used to be 53 countries in the old system. Now it was 47. It's not a huge difference, but also in the old commission, the Western countries had some more significant influence from the way the seats were divided. That was from the old days when there were more countries in the West before post-colonialism. So they made a change, and Africa and Asia got more seats and the West got less. So that didn't help with the democratic representation. And the reality, sadly, is that the dictatorships really care to be there. And a country like Canada, they don't need to be a member. They're a democracy. Not perfect, they're a democracy, and they don't feel the need to be a member. But if you're Cuba, if you're Venezuela, if you're China, you want to be there because you know that you are not a legitimate democracy at all. You are an unelected dictatorship, and it's very embarrassing if you get condemned by the world body. So the worst dictatorships are campaigning, and they're using all their resources. They're trading favors, they're doing deals. And sadly, the worst regimes are fighting to be there, and they're willing to give up more, trade other seats and bribe countries with money and other things to get elected. So I think in a nutshell, that's.
But in the beginning of 2006, when they succeeded to make the first change in the first elected body of the new council, there was like a kind of equilibrium or a kind of more democracies than dictatorship?
No,
since the beginning already started to be a mess?
Since the beginning. I was in Geneva. I was in the room of the Human Rights Commission. It's called the Commission on Human Rights. And then a few months later, they said, this room is now called the Human Rights Council. I looked around the room. Before, when I looked around the room, I used to sit voting Egypt, Pakistan, Cuba, Libya. And then a few months later, it was the Human Rights Council. I was in the same room, and I saw Egypt, Pakistan, Cuba, Saudi Arabia. It was the same countries. So it did not change. From the beginning, it did not change. It was terrible from the beginning.
Okay, to make a last question, because I know
it was even worse. It was even worse, to tell you, because the United States was always a member almost every year since 2006. But when they created the new council, America said, we don't want to join it. It was George W. Bush and John Bolton. And things got even worse because America was historically the leader in fighting bad things. And today we saw leadership, Andre, a few hours ago, the U.S. ambassador in Geneva, Michelle Taylor, of the U.S. ambassador to the Human Rights Council, she condemned anti-Semitic remarks by Milun Kotari, member of the Human Rights Council Commission of Inquiry against Israel. He talked about the Jewish lobby that controls social media and said that Israel shouldn't be a member of the United Nations. And she condemned him. And that was very significant. So that was a good example when the US shows leadership. And I'd like to see more of that. And when the US left in 2006, for 3 years they were missing, things did not get better, it got worse.
Yeah, I actually, it's amazing how the responsible, I wrote an article a couple of months ago that the word that can do something, the part of the word that can really influence and help people are doing nothing to stop bad things to happen from those that are doing nothing. So we see this in the council, we see this in the UN. People normally ask questions about, okay, but what is the real impact of those resolutions? I mean, the UN is a very important body. They can condemn countries. Despite if you take out the Security Council that really can use force, and it's very hard to pass a resolution there, but the General Assembly or the United Nations Council for Human Rights, when the condemnation comes, all the newspapers take, of course, the news is like the UN condemned Israel, and nobody wants to read who is the country that voted for or against. But in the end of the day, despite the condemnation, there is something real that they can create policy, they can influence something in the lives of the people.
Yeah, it's a good question you're asking. Of the UN in America, or maybe in Israel, or maybe in Brazil.
If you can start again, like, because I wasn't hearing you.
Okay, now you hear me?
Yeah.
You hear me now? Yeah, okay. I start again.
Yeah.
So some people who are skeptical of the United Nations, who don't trust it, people who live in America, in Israel, maybe some people in Brazil who follow you, may be skeptical of the UN, and they may think like David Ben-Gurion, Israel's first prime minister. He reportedly said, shmum, which in Israel is the United Nations, it's the UN. It's like saying in America, you could say the UN shmuen. Who cares, right? We don't care. And the reality is that whether we like it or not, the large percentage of populations in democratic countries, in Britain, France, Germany, America, United States. I know when I say America, I have to include North and South America. I'm Canadian, so when I say America, I mean the United States of America. 50%, 60%, 70% take, according to a survey by the Global Pew Survey, take the United Nations very seriously. They regard it as credible, authoritative. So when they see the headlines, the United Nations says, similar to what you said, they take it seriously. And you asked about the impact. So in many cases, in some cases in the Security Council decisions can be considered binding. And sometimes a Security Council decision can affect things on the ground. When Israel fought the Second Lebanon War against Hezbollah, there was a Security Council resolution that was kind of the end of the war. Now, it was negotiated. It was kind of the form of the negotiation with America and others, and it was the place where the end of the war was negotiated in a resolution, and it probably affected things after it was adopted. The next day, things may have changed on the ground. And obviously, other Security Council resolutions very much inform the development of certain negotiations, most famously, of course, 242, the Security Council resolution from 1967, which is cited very often in the negotiations between Israel and its Arab neighbors. So I'd say some UN resolutions can impact things on the ground, but many UN resolutions, if we speak about the General Assembly or UNESCO or the World Health Organization or the Human Rights Council, where I'm my specialty, in many cases, they don't directly affect things on the ground, but they can have two effects. I mean, one is these commissions of inquiry. These are quite significant. When the infamous Goldstone report of 2009 came out, that was a big story in the world, and it didn't require any change on the ground, the way that you pass a law in a democracy and the reality changes. You pass the law, there's a different reality. It's not the same as that, but by creating these commissions, which make these reports, which get world headlines, and they produce reports which sound like they're official and they sound like they're credible, they get referred to. So after the Goldstone report, which accused Israel's leaders of deliberately killing Palestinians, that 500-page report was used against Israelis. In Britain, in the United Kingdom, there were people who brought court cases against Tzipi Livni, who was the foreign minister during that time, to try to get her arrested. And they attached, as the attachment, Annex A, the Goldstone report. And so it can really affect people's lives. And they send these things to The Hague. So the whole effort to criminalize Israel, to criminalize Israelis who are leadership for defending themselves against terrorists, it can be very significant in fueling that, affecting public opinion around the world. It does have an impact. Yeah.
So our 40 minutes is off.
And we see that, and we see that, for example, I mean, once in a while, the Human Rights Council does the good thing. It happens sometimes. Sometimes they adopt a resolution on Venezuela, sometimes on Syria, sometimes on Russia. It's quite rare, but sometimes it happens. And then the fact that the dictatorships want to join tells you that it matters. If it didn't matter at all, China, Cuba, Venezuela, Russia, they wouldn't join, but they always want to join, because for them, the decisions do influence public opinion. It could even influence the legitimacy of their own regimes, that someone in China will see that the UN said China is a dictatorship. The UN never said it, but if they would, it could harm them. So we see by the fact that the dictatorships run to join the council that they believe it has impact.
I find very, very amazing and unique that we failed to create rules and regulations on stuff that in very important things, and we can create rules and regulations in other things. For example, if FIFA gets the knowledge, gets to know that a country is torturing his players, they will cancel the country for participating in the FIFA World Cup. If a airline is not paying salaries or is not doing the maintenance that they need to do in the planes, this airline going to be canceled from the airspace from most of the countries. And in this field that is so important, countries fail to cancel those countries that are against human rights and talking and giving the world lectures about human rights. Is unbelievable. It's amazing. And your work, Hillel, is very, very important to our generation. The organization and your work is very, very, very important to all the organizations that educate about Israel in the world, including Stand With Us as an education organization. And we are very happy, and we need UN Watch to continue to be strong and bigger and bigger and bigger in order to expose this totally nonsense that happened in 2022. We're going to have a World Cup in a dictatorship of Qatar that behave to the people that build the stadiums as slaves. And nobody talks about that in the United Nations, right?
True. Qatar is a member of the Human Rights Council. It has never been condemned for what you rightly described as slave labor. Thousands of people have probably been killed trying to build the stadiums for this World Cup.
Yeah.
You will never hear about it, unfortunately. And well, yes, it's quite true that we're in in Aramaic, in the Talmud, there's an expression, leit din v'leit dayan. There's no law and there's no judge. And unfortunately, at the Human Rights Council, often at the United Nations, it's the same. There is no court that you can go to enforce things. I grew up in Canada, I lived in Switzerland, I worked as a lawyer in the United States. If something terrible happens, you can go to a court. You may not always win, but if something really terrible happens, you kind of count on the fact that the court will help you. And usually they do. It's not perfect, but usually they do. And you also count on your elected government and different checks and balances. The United Nations, there's none of that. If Pakistan and the PLO 1 year ago in May 2021 decided to create this commission of inquiry targeting Israel, they just decided to do it completely one-sided. They appointed people who hate Israel, who go on the internet a few days ago and give an interview talking about the Jewish lobby, making anti-Semitic remarks. They were chosen deliberately to be on this commission, and there's no way to appeal it. The best thing you can hope is that governments will vote no. Some governments do, the United States, sometimes Canada. Canada's not on the Human Rights Council, but in New York recently, this past week, they voted no, importantly. United Kingdom sometimes votes no. Brazil, I should say, in the past several years, has changed their votes in a better way in the past 5 years or so, and has, in a number of cases, voted no or abstained and improved their voting. And I hope that remains. It's very important. Brazil is an important country in the world, and that's very important. So at the end of the day, it's really, and you asked me before about how do you get change, it's up to the individual countries. If our democracies, the leading ones, the US, Germany, France, the UK, if they're silent, bad things will happen. If they push back, they can bring some other pressure, and they don't always do enough. And that's part of our work, is trying to get them to do the right thing. I saw that 2 countries, maybe 3, the United States, Britain, Canada, have condemned this commissioner who made anti-Semitic remarks. I hope other countries do as well. I hope Brazilian government says something, and I hope others in Europe do as well. It's quite important.
We also hope. So Hillel, I wanted to thank you. Thank you for everything you do. Keep strong, keep fighting. We're going to meet someday. Now after the COVID-19, I'm hopefully going to meet in Israel or any other Congress that we have in the US, maybe in New York, maybe in Washington, maybe in Geneva, or maybe in Jerusalem or in Tel Aviv. Thank you again for having the time to talk to us. And thank you for everything you do. And just a reminder em português, pessoal, esse vídeo vai ser traduzido, vai colocar subtítulos, vai ficar gravado aqui, vocês vão poder acompanhar a tradução para quem não acompanhou até agora ou para quem não fala inglês, tá bom? Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Hillel, for everything you do again, and see you soon in Israel.
Thank you, Andre. It's been great speaking with you. Thank you for sharing our work to the Portuguese world. It's very much appreciated. And then again, I hear you're doing incredible work, so keep at it, and happy to continue to be in touch.
Have you. Shalom. Shalom, shalom. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.